I'm really pleased to be here, and I hope everybody feels free to come close. And I prefer probably to walk around with the mic once we get the pictures going. I'm indebted to my colleague Thomas Bevan, who's going to press the button here. Thomas has been working with me for 4 years plus now in converting the old police station at Cordova and Main Street into a center for social innovation. And it's been an exciting week because we, with the First Nations people from Chilliwack and a wonderful woodworker, moved the first giant cedar log into the main floor. So that project is a really exciting one, and it's rooted, for me at least, in the missing women. That has been an indelible scar on the nature of the city, and it's an attempt to begin to remedy some small pieces. But at the same time, Surrey is one of those places that hasn't cared enough about the social milieu. It's been very successful in terms of its physical game and moving on, but it doesn't have the kind of services we have in this town. And in many ways, at the back of my mind, if I'm around to carry on in the planning game much longer, I think Surrey is going to have something like our rehabilitated police station as well. And that would be fun to see. How do we really begin to integrate social planning and social entrepreneurship and the university and Surrey and the new town center? It needs to be woven together in a much more interesting way, in a more networked way, and in a way that involves everyone. So I find Surrey really exciting because of the scale of the place, because it's, and I frequently have thought about our region as something like the Bay Area in California. You know, there's that inner city, which is a bit of a gem in many ways, and then there's that sprawling city on the other side of the bay in Oakland and so on. And I think more and more, when I think about our region, it's the Burrard Peninsula, and with the focus on this downtown here in Vancouver, but it's also south of the river. I kept arguing in Vancity that south of the river, we have to think about the nature south of the river. And in some of my studies in terms of assessment and land values and so on, it's been an interesting game to look at the land value question in this region. I established the Assessment Authority of British Columbia back in the 70s too, and the whole purpose was to begin to understand our land market. And so when I was doing some work in St. Petersburg in Russia when I was a deputy minister and thought we could use our crown corporations to help them rebuild St. Petersburg, magnificent place of course, I was able to do all of the work in terms of looking at the cash flow in this downtown. Never been done before, I don't think. Didn't intend to start on this, but it's so important given our problems currently with the land market, that what I found was, when I looked back a dozen years when we did the studies, the cash flow out of downtown Vancouver was the equivalent of 150% of the city budget. So I was able to show to them that, wow, look at the potential revenue for your rebuilt city of St. Petersburg. But the mafia understood it far better than anybody else. They're munching away and buying up real estate in London. But, but to have done that work and then said, okay, what was happening in the rest of the region? Well, the values in 12 years had gone up 24-fold in this area, in our downtown, way back in the mid-90s, and we all know what's happened since. The only other part of the region where land values jumped to that extent was Surrey. And the rest of the region was 12-fold. So Surrey, double the rest of the region. Downtown in Vancouver, double the rest of the region. And we all know that so much more has happened since then. And you know, the history of Surrey is partly an agricultural area. And after the Second World War, we had social planners in Ottawa that most of us don't know about. One of them was a professor of mine. And they did the social planning for the post-war period. And we had a terrible housing problem back then. And the Mackenzie King government had hired social democrats, forgive me, to do the post-war planning because they were afraid of another depression. And out of that, we educated working men that never had the chance to go to university. We built housing projects, Fraser View, Renfrew Heights, VLA lands, Strawberry Hill, Kennedy Heights. All of these were 1.5 acres. And those 1.5 acres now in Surrey are townhouse sites and high-rise sites and so on. And I concluded there'd been this great shift of South Asians from Vancouver to Surrey way back when, and it's repeated. I concluded that that was probably the greatest shift in wealth in the history of British Columbia, the transfer and change in those land values. So Surrey has again and again been repeating land value changes that are absolutely stunning. They're facing a bit of a hiccup now because of the competition on other parts of SkyTrain. Francis Bula has written quite well about the recent economics and the challenges that that represent. So right now, I think Surrey has hit some minor speed bumps. But what we don't understand is that we uniquely, 20 years ago, when ICBC and we got together, and Bing Tom and Michael Heaney and Gordon Smith, who are here today, got together to rethink the nature of downtown Surrey and the beginning of it. And so we, in this massive area, here we are, it shows on the screen now, that's Central City. We did everything including focus groups out there in Surrey and said, we got to name this thing we're doing here. And the one that everybody liked was Central City, so it stuck and it works. And let's catch the, so, Whalley has gone from being a dumping ground when I was a kid. The reason I got so involved in it was I'm a kid from the east side, and the east side of this town was not well looked after when I was a kid. And I saw Whalley and North Surrey as the new east side. And I was determined we were going to change that. And I knew that the people like Gordon and Michael and Bing and the others could pull it off. And it wasn't easy. I mean, we had our own fights amongst this lovely team because Bing, despite his immense talent, really hadn't found the answer that I needed. And I didn't intend to say all this, but why not, for the record? I said, Bing, my ass is hanging out a country mile on this project. Everybody thinks I'm out of my goddamn head to do this in Whalley, this suburban slum, and this commercial suburban slum. And so it ain't good enough. The design is not good enough. And it was miserable for all of us. And then finally, one of Bing's staff said, I think we have to reroute, 102nd. Isn't that the diagonal? And so we created the diagonal that created the space for the plaza. And then this magnificent Galleria and the whole complex. And which won awards in Cannes, France, and so on, and was competing with the best in the world. So you just look at this picture, God, isn't it sculpture? Isn't that simply magnificent sculpture? And I was feeling really high about this when we were really moving it along, and it was clear it was going to happen. And I said to myself, God, this is a new central business district for Surrey. And I never even mentioned it to Bing or the staff, or I don't think I mentioned it to Gordon. Maybe I did. I said, I want a grand sculpture in that plaza. I'm almost ready to go to Britain and pick up a moor or something like that. And my great regret is that I didn't do it. I didn't do it. And more recently, the fun thing I've been thinking, I'm really not sticking to my script here at all. I think some of you folks looked at Lincoln Square or Lincoln Center in Manhattan in terms of some preliminary work. And there was real arguments there in Lincoln Plaza about the size of the fountain, And I said to myself, imagine if Whalley's Corner was a big roundabout and you put in a giant fountain. said, my God, and in my crudest way at that point, I said, all the rubes would come in from the valley and just sit around that roundabout to watch the fountains. And then I said to myself, and this rube would come out from the city to watch those fountains too. So enough of that. Here then is that wonderful plaza that still needs more sculpture. And here, the glorious library in Central City. And look at the shape of that pattern there inside the library and the outside. It's transformational stuff, and it has to change the soul really. So for Surrey, we're on the edge of more and more of that kind of stuff. Let's carry on, Thomas. I'm talking too much. That's the last one. And so the interesting story about all this is we spent $250 million of ICBC money, which had only been invested in paper, not stuff here. And a colleague of mine way back when, Bob Strachan, created ICBC. And he said, well, we really need a public insurance company. I said, yeah, I get that. It makes sense, and the efficiency. He said, no, it's having the reserves here. And the reserves will allow us to do stuff in BC we would never otherwise do. And that's what happened here. So we spent $250 million, which seems like peanuts now, to create this magnificent center. And the amazing thing is, private sector people have come along, and the former mayor of Surrey said, our $250 million generated $4 billion in private investment. That was transformational. And I must say, when I see that other tower here that was created right on the City Hall Plaza, I'm so pleased that Michael and others are going to be working on this, because I'm not convinced about that City Hall Plaza. My gut is telling me we have to complete our plaza, and that so that 102nd ends up really being amalgamated on the great occasions. And as another friend of mine said, in terms of the projects I've been involved in this project, in this province, so lucky me, where did people in Surrey meet during the election, or during the Winter Olympics? They came to this public place that we all helped create. They came to Robson Square, which we all helped create. And they came to Whistler, which Al Rain and a few of us helped create. So on that great public occasion. So what I'm saying is, all of this is telling us that we need to intrude into the marketplace. The marketplace can't do it all for us. And we have crown corporations in this province that can, along with universities, change the world. They can change the world. So, Thomas, thank you for carrying on. So there's a kind of zoning plan, as planners tend to produce. And I guess what knocks your head off when you really think about it is scale. I think I was meeting with Bing's gang one day, and we were looking at the length of this thing, and I think it's like stretching from Main Street to Stanley Park. Now these are ambitious people, people across that river. Imagine. So that's challenging in itself. So I'm really overjoyed that Michael here is now the head of the Surrey Development Corporation, and we'll have all those thoughts in the back of his mind on how you differentiate and make this work in a more interesting way. So they're ambitious. I think they're going to win at the end of the day, but there'll be other bumps along the way. So the question of a CBD. I'm really pleased that Ken Cameron, who is the senior planner for the region, is really keen about a central business district in North Surrey, because not many of us have been until more recent decades. So I mentioned that CBDs like Vancouver's are great generators of wealth, and so we need them to generate wealth in our society. At a certain point, once you get the right mix and so on, we are a kind of a barbell region. And we've been that forever. In early days, the interurban system, the old interurban railway that went to Chilliwack, was the route that linked us all. and New Westminster was the other end of the barbell. But in more recent years, it's clearly been North Surrey. So we've got this barbell challenge, and I think we really have to encourage both centers, but we have to try and see to it that the diversity at that other end is richer than it has been. You know, all these towers and so on are exciting. The investment is exciting, but this picture here shows you the ground level being far too sterile in Central City and North Surrey. And so that's intriguing. And my friend Gordon Smith, in his earlier career, worked for Jimmy Pattison and building Expo. And he quietly told me on one occasion that he thought that the leasehold rate that Jimmy wanted for a major site at Expo was too high. And Jimmy said, "Oh, no, you can always squeeze a little more out, you know." And Gordon said, "I don't think so, not on this one." And unfortunately, that one was the only one that failed at Expo, the one that Gordon blew the whistle on. It was an extraordinary pleasure to work with Gordon on this project because he was, you know, it was ahead of time and it was less than budget and all those good things. But it was an immensely creative exercise between all the players. And so we face a challenge now with retailing in modern society. You know, you get, you know, the fact that Sears is disappearing under our eyes right now is telling you something. And then you've got Amazon and others just playing this intensive role, and retailing is changing dramatically. So that's a challenge for Surrey and everybody else. But then I think about my friend Gordon, knowing that the squeezed player was going to lose, and everybody loses. So I think the challenge, one of the wonderful challenges in Surrey, because they are as loose-jointed as they are in some ways, is to rethink the nature of tenure on the ground floor. And there's a great need for NGOs to populate some of the ground floor in Surrey, Central City. And there's a great need for entrepreneurial skill to find answers beyond the traditional landlord and tenant arrangement. So between the university, Vancity, ICBC, or some other Crown corporation, and the kind of know-how that Gordon had brought to Jimmy, I think there's the means of a new system of populating floor-level stuff. And in Central City right now, it's a bit of a desert. And so there's people come out and they make a ton of money on the towers and they don't really rethink the ground network. So that's real skill in terms of rethinking a Central City's ground network and amenities. Now, our family had a lot of fun building the Railway Club for about 30 years in this town. We met Katie Lang and we helped her go to wherever she wanted to go, and all the local musicians. And I kept saying to myself, so many of the local musicians came from Surrey. They came to be excited here. And so I said to myself, damn it, you know, you could put 6 of the old railway clubs there in that, even a part of the CBD, and it would excite the place. And then at the same time, God, we need more student housing. Just all the student housing that you need out there, and the kind of things you could do. And, you know, they need something like what we're doing at the police station here, where, you know, we can recognize the needs of a lot of people that aren't cared for enough in that community. I mean, here, Whalley, in that old area, is the richest land south of the river, and it has the poorest people south of the river. It's a mix that should not be accepted. So the challenge in that urban area is how do we begin to do it all and integrate it all and make it inclusive. Then you've got a real town and so on. So, Thomas. Okay. And of course, I think they're being smarter than we are on rapid transit. What have they got there? 29 kilometers of light rail that will link Guildford and Newton, and subsequently the diagonal that will go to Langley. That's going to reinforce the central business district dramatically. And so that's 29 stations that they're going to have out there that is aching then for more density. And we'll have, 6 stations or something like that? Yeah, 6 stations and 5 kilometers of very expensive subway and SkyTrain. I think they're showing us the way, again, in terms of that stuff. And I find it exciting. Thomas, what next? Yeah, there's the competing centers. And so here you can see what it's like in Guildford and Newton. And, the parking is amazing. I think they have to be careful about not allowing those centers to attract the stuff that we need in the central business district. And I think they have to be careful about that. Because I think Newton has a lot going for it, particularly with that industrial area next door. And I think there's pressure to play with the industrial zoning and all the rest of it. And that makes it tough. The other thing that worries me, and it's sort of a sidebar, is the South Asian community hasn't bought in, from what I can see, to Central City. And I think that has to be thought about seriously, because it really does have to be more inclusive than it is now. Okay, next. Power lines. In the early days in Surrey, they didn't give a damn, BC Hydro. Well, maybe they still don't, but this gives you an idea of how big these right-of-ways are. They are 300 feet wide. 300 feet wide. And back when I was a deputy minister, I told them, what I want you guys to do is understand the electromagnetic waves from these goddamn things. And because I worried as an MLA for the east side about Boundary Road. What about the impact it has? And the Scandinavians have looked at it far more seriously than any of us. And they just won't let children be underneath them or near them. There's a school down in California that was looked at in early days. And on one side of the school where the power line was, all the teachers ended up with leukemia. And the other side, they didn't. This is huge stuff. And this is a public crown corporation. Now, I pushed them 20 years ago to look at this. And they should do it now. The new government should insist on it. But when you look at this land and you say, let's play with this, the whole eastern side of Wally has that diagonal thing coming in right near 102nd. Good God, they're mainly using it for open space where they can. But no, the real question is, okay, what's the dynamics between land values and what you can do on the land values in terms of being smart, and the electromagnetic wave in question? I think we must be perilously close to the balance between burying those bloody lines and using the land. I could be entirely wrong, but at the time we had one of the best consultants in public policy or polling, and he said at the time, 20 years ago, this thing is just like cigarettes. We lied about cigarettes forever, and finally it ended. And he said, in 20 years, the lying about electromagnetic problems is going to be open. He said, I see that as a train coming down the tracks. Surrey just might now, with the change of government, have the opportunity to rethink those lands and think about the new rent that can be collected there, or whether the health problems can be dealt with. So that's a neat one for Surrey. Next. Okay, Bridgeview. Now there's a melange of stuff down there. The new Patella Bridge will go in. Now you see that shiny white thing down in the bottom right-hand corner. They're very smartly moving their rec center down to that escarpment near Scott Road. And then there's the Bridgeview or the neighborhood and so on. This is aching for change. And Surrey has been smart enough to shift the rec center down there. But you can't help but look at the road that goes out to Tawasin, the industrial road, and say, well, they haven't thought that through very well. They should have a toll on it. They've gone and built a giant shopping center out in the middle of nowhere at Tawasin. And it wouldn't have built there if we'd put a toll on the road. and the road was built for industrial purposes in terms of the whole south of the river question for industry. So that's aching for some rethinking and a bit of fun around that. And industrial land, you know, we have hardly any in this town. What are we? 29 versus 63 in Surrey. And then most of us have never seen the stuff in South Surrey, the small Campbell River Heights. And look at it, this very intensive thing. And the city's been really quite painfully careful about how they design it and landscape it and so on. But we visited an outfit that's moving there, Caraventa, and with hundreds of manufacturing employees. They're moving ahead of us dramatically on industrial land as well. And farmland. Well, you know, we don't have much farmland in this town other than Southlands and the horsey set that can afford multi-million-dollar houses. But Surrey has this Nickameckle and Serpentine farm belt of the ALR that's really spectacular in its own way. So I find myself as an old planner saying, well, what about that interface? What about that interface in Surrey where you can be part of the residential neighborhood, and how you manage that interface? How do people enjoy themselves, both sides of that line? And I think there's kind of a new kind of urban-rural networking game that could go on in that interface that would be far more interesting than we might realize. So the farmland of that basin is super intriguing, and it's not there for a lot of other communities. Railways, well, you know, the grand opportunity is to work on the Burlington Northern Railway in this region. I was able to work with Glenn Clark and create the West Coast Express on the north side of the Fraser River. Everybody said I was nuts then. That's not in the regional plan. I said, well, I don't really care. I think it'll work. And so Glenn and I actually met with the head of the CPR, and they were in bad shape then. So I said, there were just the three of us, and I thought I'd make a grab as an old socialist. I said, well, you know, forgive me if you're really offended, but I'd like to talk to you about joint ownership of the right-of-way. And I thought he'd say, oh, you socialist, SOB, get out of here. What he said was, we're in such tough shape, I have to entertain anything. Imagine if we'd pursued that. We would have owned half of the CPR right-of-way through this valley that has such little land. It would have been magnificent. The people that replaced me weren't so keen, and so it didn't happen. But you know, when you look at the Burlington Northern stretching from our False Creek Flats through the cut in Grandview, and then out over the rickety bridge in New Westminster, and then you look at it following the escarpment in Surrey, the North Delta escarpment, and then the whole question of getting over the Nickameckle, and then going around Crescent Beach and around the front of White Rock. Isn't this the kind of grand thing we should be rethinking in this region? Surrey, with its great growth and its dramatic new beginning in Central City, needs a waterfront outlet like we've had in this part of the region. Look at that. Look at that stretch in White Rock. And the city boundary, amazingly, just follows high tide. And then it goes out along the wharf, up the wharf, and it's this appendage out. And the rest of it is provincial crown land. Look at it on Google Earth. You can see that sand sweeping almost to the border. And you say to yourself, wow, just some modest improvements along there, and creating a couplet of Marine Drive and a new road that is more or less the other side of the railway. Just think about that. And most of these things that I like to think about are things that can generate money. They don't have to cost money. So if you reroute that railway, you can generate the cost of doing that and more. And finally, you give the south of the Fraser an outlet that is incredible. Okay, the next step. Well, as a kid, I admired a guy that had a club foot and was determined to become a great lifter, weightlifter. His name was Doug Hepburn, and he had a gymnasium up at Main and Kingsway, and I greatly was impressed by him. There he is, this guy that had this disability, so-called, who ended up being a champion weightlifter, kid from our neighborhood, and I think that barbell kind of says, hey, this region is like a barbell, and we can lift it up, and we can really make it spin. So there we are with that kind of image to think about in terms of the future of the region. I've talked enough. I'm happy to carry on a dialogue with people here that I've worked with in the past and others that are here. Surrey is the future in terms of south of the river, and I think it is the future then for the Lower Mainland. I think we have other problems in our hinterland that are desperate. None of our hinterland has grown like we have, and a lot of these things are tied to land tenure, which is another big question, and our forest land tenure system is preventing us from settling the rest of the province. But that's another speech, and I lose too many people if I got into that one. So I'm happy to talk about this some more with you and to reinforce the whole idea that Surrey needs a bit of a push right now. It needs that integration of the players again to make it really sing, and it needs this humanizing exercise that can enhance it some more. But yeah, it is the future for this region, and if we're really thoughtful about it, we can change the world.